Welcome to episode 14 of the podcast On The Brink, presented by Auditchain. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Striking here in the digital media world, and I'm so happy to be hosting today's event. The topic for today, audit companies have stepped back from agreed upon procedures in auditing crypto exchanges. Why? And how does Auditchain fit into this wonderfully timed event? Ladies and gentlemen, Auditchain's Chief Marketing Officer, Yoli Chisholm. Yoli?
All right. Well, welcome everybody to the first episode of 2023 of the On The Brink podcast. And I'm on with Jason, the lead architect of Auditchain. How's it going, Jason?
Fantastic, but it will get better.
All right. So we'll kick it off. One of the things we wanted to talk about is the withdrawal of the accounting profession in supporting crypto. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are on a number of levels. One, it's also been publicized that graduate students are not following through on their accounting degrees. They're not going into the profession. There is a exodus from the profession. A lot of them are coming into crypto. And it seems as though that maybe there aren't any standards to audit crypto assets on balance sheets for operating entities. There are accounting standards and how to treat them. But the other thing is that, look, the public had a very big misconception of what those proof of reserves reports were. They were not audits. They were conducted under what's called an agreed upon procedure. And it is an engagement standard under the AICPA and under the ISB. It is a negotiation between the subject under audit and the professional services firm that's conducting the examination, because it's not an audit, right?
Right.
So they decide on the scope of what's being examined. And I'll try to enact what might happen. So behind you, there is a number one. Can you turn around and see that? Do you see the number one on the wall? And the auditor will say, well, we're not going to say that we saw it. We're going to include it in the report. It is a representation of yours, right? They don't give any assurances. They give no opinions. These reports are typically not shared publicly. And on top of it, in the report, it says you should not rely on this report. Now, an audit opinion doesn't say that. An audit opinion, as the result of a comprehensive audit engagement, says we act as public accountants for whoever it is. We perform our work pursuant to standards set by, the various standard setters. We've examined the financial statements as prepared by management and their assertions. And based on our examinations, the financial statements for the period ended blah present fairly in all material respects the financial and operating condition of the company, right? That's what it says. So that's an entirely different engagement than an agreed upon procedure that says you should not rely on this report, right? And I think because these reports were being waved around, right, the term proof of reserves didn't help either. And the audit firms decided that, relative to this is a small percentage of our business, it's not worth the risk. Let's get out of here and let's withdraw our reports. The other aspect could be that the SEC has been looking into those reports and what they mean and how the public is perceiving them. So there are no auditors that are providing services in the crypto space unless you are ready for a comprehensive audit engagement under well-established standards like Coinbase, right? Coinbase is a public company. Deloitte is their auditor, right? So they have definite and specific procedures. They've got the controls in place, and those controls are sufficient enough to give assurance to the auditor that they can somewhat rely on what they're being provided by management, and they can reasonably rely, they have reasonable assurance that they can rely on the representations of management.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned they withdrew because they might have, decided it wasn't worth the risk. What in your opinion was the risk?
It's reputational. Meyers and Armanino are getting sued in class action suits right now. They have to pay lawyers, right? If they lose, they're going to have to pay damages. It's just it's not worth the risk, right? Plus, you have malpractice insurance policies usually, right? And so your malpractice policy, your insurer wants to know the kind of work you're doing. You should be confined to that specific work that you disclosed on your insurance policy application that you renew every year. And if you fall outside of that, it jeopardizes coverage, right?
Hi, Jason. I think the question Yoli raised about risk is pertinent to why do people even, or not people, but companies ask accounting or auditing firms to do an agreed upon procedure if there's an inherent risk in that as well?
Yeah.
Well, there's less of a risk for the one asking for the report because they only want to expose information that is convenient for them to disclose, and also that's sufficiently enough, they think, to satisfy the public, right? And in this case, the public are depositors who have their assets in custody with these exchanges, right?
So you mentioned Mazars being sued. So do you think that, this might be too simplistic, but do you think that the public perceives that these audit companies should actually be working in the interest of the investors, and
That
should
uh,
do you
oh
think
my
that's
God,
That's the
simplistic?
quagmire.
this
Right?
is a quagmire. It's a quagmire. It is a quagmire.
Right.
They are supposed to be working in the interest of public good. They have been contracted to perform a limited scope examination. Now, there is a severance of what statements were made by the exchanges that published those reports, right? And then there were the warnings that the auditor, professional services firm, put in those reports, right? It's going to be up to a judge and a jury to figure that out. They're going to hash that out, right? It's still a risk, right?
Yeah.
Litigation is a risk. It's a dice roll.
So to sum it up, what do you think this all means? Proof of reserves not adequate, withdrawal of the procedures, withdrawal of the accounting firms. What does this mean for the crypto space?
That's a very good question, right? It means that you're trusting. Look, FTX and the statements of John J. Ray after the discovery of the lack of controls, oversight, and reliable financial information, I think is the tip of the iceberg. Now, the good ones are getting more ready right now. There's a thing called readiness, right? You pay a consulting firm to get you ready, and they may even write a report that enumerates the steps you take, the controls you implemented in order to be ready, right? But there's no audit services for anything except a comprehensive audit engagement, and only if you are ready. Only if you're ready. The auditor is going to determine whether or not they want to take on the engagement based upon what they examine as pre-existing controls and whether or not they can rely on management's assertions and they can rely on data that they interrogate in systems, right?
Yeah.
So that's what it means. Now, if I want to toot our own horn, it means that we are the one and only solution left. And we will provide a scientific method of providing proof of state that's externally validated without the need for a centralized accounting firm, right? It's not an audit. It's not an opinion. There is no assurance being provided, but it is metrics that give the reader who relies on it more comfort, right? We don't use the word audit. It's an external validation. We don't provide assurance. That's not what we do, right? And we certainly don't give any opinions.
Now, when you say
So
that the audit firm steps out of it and Auditchain can fill that spot, do you see I guess, a business case for the audit firm to say, hey, we'll come back to you and talk to you. Give us a year or two of you guys using the Auditchain's protocols so we can get a good public view of your data, and then we'll trust you better, and then we'll come on as your central auditor, even though you're a smaller company and not one of our billion-dollar customers. Is that a potential?
Or they can join the cohort of the other validators and try this out. We do have a lot of CPAs that are interested in running nodes on the network. And, it can go in that direction, right? What we do does not fit into audit standards. It doesn't fit into a regulatory box. The effort is to scientifically prove the state of the operating entity. What is its state, right? A balance sheet is a statement, right? A P&L is a statement, right? So total assets, not just custody, total assets minus total liabilities will always equal equity. That's your end state. Your balance sheet is an instant look as of right now, as of December 31st, as of a specific date and time, right? The other statements are duration based. It's the accumulation of debits and credits during a period, which then rolls up to the state, the end state, right? Same with a cash flow statement. You have cash balance at the beginning of the period, cash balance at the end of the period, and the articulation of changes in state in between. So we will scientifically prove the state of the operating entity. That includes everything, right? We'll have a separate itemization on a balance sheet, which will itemize the amount of assets that were deposited by depositors. The other side is the liability because the firm owes those assets to the customers, payable on demand, right? And then there's the operating aspect of the company, right? If the stockholders' equity, if the equity is a positive number, the next question is what percentage of that number is in cash, right? If it's a negative number, well, then God help you.
We started this conversation with you saying, graduates aren't even going into the audit profession, and then, accountants pulling out of crypto. But do you see a world where, what needs to change in the accounting profession in order for accountants to be able to service crypto? What needs to change?
Well, first and foremost, I think it needs to be an exciting space.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if you ask any accountant, it's just time to make the donuts. Time to make the donuts, right?
Some of the younger accountants may not get that reference.
Yeah, that's I know. Okay, so that goes back to the 80s, right? Watch a Dunkin' Donuts. Google time to make the donuts commercial, you'll find it. But the advisory side is more exciting because you got blockchain happening on that side, right? And they're inventing new stuff and they're doing cool things and stuff. But in assurance, it's a very, I admire those guys that they go to work for 30 years. Maybe they work for two firms in their life And all they do all day long is tick boxes, perform examinations. The statesmen in the space believe in visiting you in the field, sitting down in front of you, asking questions, and seeing how your body moves or twitches, right? And that these guys, listen, these guys had a real instinct to know whether or not somebody was lying, right? You could twitch the wrong way, and he's going to call his audit manager, and his audit manager is going to say, well, why don't we ask him this question, or ask for this document, or ask for this, or what have you. And they were detectives in a way, right? But auditors and audit engagement is focused on materiality, right? It's a statistical analysis. It's the square root of all the accounts and all the transactions. If there's an anomaly there, they'll escalate. And then you got the boss again. We got X number of hours on this engagement. If you dig 6 feet, you might find 2 bodies. But if you dig another 6 feet, you might find 40 more. So stop digging. Because if it's found that they did something wrong, and we had knowledge about it, they can prove that in a court of law, and all bets are off.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up about the assurance side of the house. I just read an article about how, because of the internal systems that many of these accounting firms have developed to check those boxes, much of the audit job has gone from being the detective and a little bit exciting behind it, little forensics, into filing PDFs in the right folders every day. And really not even getting to the point where you examine the PDF. You just have taken, the client said, this is the results, and you file it in the results folder for that topic, and then you move on. And it's switched that side of the auditing process. And I can see how Auditchain can bring some excitement back to that for these firms if they do put a node in.
Yeah, I mean, can we get them excited about running a node or the process control and NFTs? Like, how do we get the millennial accountants excited about that?
Well, the millennial accountants are willing to run nodes now, right?
Yeah.
But we want to make the profession look. Every time there's a fraud that occurs, and an auditor was the auditor, they all come out and say the profession needs to change, but it never does, right? The only way I think it will change is either the army of voters votes for new politicians that will appoint different people at the standard setters, or I don't know. But in any event, you got to have to make it exciting, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be blockchain involved. There's got to be toys and bells and whistles, something people can get up and live for every day, right? Because I don't think this world, there aren't that many of those legacy people that make the donuts and are happy making the donuts and going to work every day and ticking boxes, right? And if there are, I want to meet them, because I'm a traditional guy, but the world's fund managers and investment managers are deriving their investment thesis in part based upon information that we've shown already to be flawed. The auditors didn't catch it. The regulators didn't catch it. Head of external reporting at the company didn't catch it. CFO didn't catch it. Yeah, it might be ticky-tack stuff, but it could be something a lot worse, right? So I want to know that I'm allocating my money to a money manager that is able to do his job a lot more easier. And in order to do that, he has to be able to aggregate data from regulatory agents a lot easier, which means it's got to be standardized, which means that it's got to be accurate, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, I tell people, do you know why the chancellor was on the brink of a second bailout for banks? Which, if those who are watching don't know, that's the inscription in the Genesis block of the Bitcoin blockchain. It's an article about the financial crisis.
14 years ago.
It's our silent protest against the centralized fractional reserve banking system, right? So since the great protest, the question is raised, why was the chancellor on the brink of a second bailout for banks? It is because it's because of the integrity and reliability of information. And the conflicted nature of the audit profession, who is solely dependent upon the subject under audit for the payment, right? And now there's only 4 of them, right? If there were a lot more, well, maybe we'd be talking a different. This would be a different dialogue. But there's only 4 of them, right? And they need help. They really need help. I think they need help.
Yeah. Well, switching gears a little bit, you mentioned Genesis blockchain. Speaking of Genesis,
Another
Oh, boy.
quagmire.
it seems like, these guys have been, the ambassadors for blockchain and crypto adoption. We think about folks like the Winklevosses and Barry Silbert, and now, what do you make of the happenings this week? And where do you think
So
it's going to go?
this is just another cog in the regulatory wheel that will spin for the foreseeable future, where the regulators are going to fund all of their regulatory budgets for the next 2-3 years by bringing enforcement actions against those who have broken their laws. And it's the only reason why I think, look, Sam Bankman-Fried gave every government around the world a reason to just outright ban this crypto problem, right? Just ban it, right? But they didn't. So my common sense tells me, if you follow the money, well, how do regulatory agencies fund themselves? Some will say that they're self-sufficient already. I don't know. Well, maybe they want to become more self-sufficient, right? Maybe they want to have a surplus, right? So if you generate 5 billion this year, let's go kick in the doors of Genesis and and Gemini. Maybe we'll disgorge $1 billion. Maybe we'll get $1 billion out of it, right? So that brings 5 to 6, right? So, but I will say this: there are a lot of people that say that the SEC is regulating through enforcement, but they're not. They're enforcing time-tested public policies of well-established regulations under well-settled law. And the last thing they want to do is spend political capital and taxpayer money legislating a new framework. That's the last thing they want to do. And if they do that, I am afraid to say, and those who are listening, you can throw an egg at me, it's going to be after the banks get it all. Then regulatory innovation will occur, because we have an existing gatekeeper community, right? We have a gatekeeper architecture. That's how the financial system works, right? The SEC has a limited amount of staff. It's up to the banks and all the gatekeepers: banks, broker-dealers, transfer agents, accountants, lawyers, and DTC, right? They have policies and procedures manuals. You got to sign that you read it when you're an employee, and you've got to agree to abide by it, right? And you have a compliance officer that's the internal enforcement department to make sure that you don't blow up the firm or get the firm in trouble. That's how the gatekeeper community works, right? So that system is never going away. And if you want it to go away, get a bigger standing army.
That seems to be the standard answer.
Right.
Get a bigger standing army. All the lobbying in the world is not going to change that until the banks have it all in the end.
But
I'm sorry.
Do you think it's a valid argument when people say the timing of the SEC seems like it's always after harm has already occurred?
That is true. They don't show up with stethoscopes. Everybody already has a stethoscope. It's the gatekeeper regulatory architecture. They show up with the body bags.
Yeah, that seems counter to their mission.
Unless, look, do you know what it takes if this was a top-heavy agency without that gatekeeper architecture? you would need, I mean, uh, you would need 1 million staff members, or maybe a
Right.
500,000 staff members,
You'd need to replace the
right?
gatekeepers with enforcers.
That's correct. That's what you'd have to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, digging a little bit, it sounds like for the Genesis folks, like this is one aspect of their business that they're saying they were in violation of the rules. This whole earn and yield side, like the SEC knew that. Why wait when until there's already been harm? Like, why not just set the rule up front? Like, I think that's what people are getting.
The rule, no, 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 no. The rule was set up when Joseph Kennedy was called upon by Franklin
We get it.
Delano
We get
Roosevelt
it.
and formed the SEC. That's when it was established, right? Your question, I think, relates to the possibility of why did they wait so long to bring
Yes.
the
Right.
action?
Exactly.
Yes.
The answer to that question is, if we wait, maybe that will embolden them and they would break even more rules. They'll make even more money, and we can earn more money by fining them.
And more investors are hurt.
They don't,
Given
they're not as concerned about investors as they are about the politics of regulation, having to go before that Senate Banking Committee or Appropriations Committee to get a budget allocated for the next year. They're more concerned with that and not looking bad on TV. Now, I have to say, Gary Gensler looks horrible to the crypto community, but to the rest of the world, he's been very steadfast in his admonitions about time-tested public policy, well-established regulations, well-settled law, right? We're just enforcing the well-settled law. All of a sudden, 3 Hours Capital happens, and Celsius, and Voyager, and oh my God, Sam Bankman-Fried. Who's correct? Who's right? You can say what you want about the legacy system, and it does have its warts and its problems. But when you uncover what's going on in the centralized CeFi crypto space, it's a free-for-all, and someone's going to hurt somebody else real soon.
Well,
So
on the
storm-
topic, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say the stormtroopers of death have been mobilized.
I should have kept going.
The rest of the year,
You should have.
the rest of the year, they're going to be very busy.
Well, Yoli brings up the Gemini and Genesis thing, and you're bringing up the SEC's time to enforcement, whether it's before enforcing policy, whether it's after by regulation or whatever the story is. Why didn't the Winklevosses or the 1,000 other programs out there that are not doing this just file an S1? That's all you got to do. And when you have $1 billion, filing an S1 is a simple process. You hire someone that can do it and do it. And when you don't have it, it can be a one-page thing. Why don't they do it?
Two reasons.
Why don't they?
Two reasons. The first reason is I would be afraid that my registration, my S1, is never going to be declared effective.
Right.
It takes a lot just to get, we haven't even had a Bitcoin ETF declared effective because there's no surveillance agreements between exchanges that Bitcoin trades on. You need to change a rule in order to give the SEC comfort and give them a well-balanced view in order to declare that registration effective, because it's all about full and fair disclosure. There's no approval or disapproval. Okay?
Right.
It's about full and fair disclosure. That's number one. Number two, if I'm a law firm and there's this revolution happening, and I'm faced with this uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty, that's a big billing opportunity for our firm.
Right.
So rather than take these kids straight through the front door of the SEC, maybe we'll, which doesn't cost a lot of money. I mean, to file I cap the fees I'm willing to pay for a full-blown S1 at $100,000. Maybe it's $150,000 now, right? A good attorney that's done those things many, many, many times will accept a capped rate. That's
Right.
150 grand. If I'm a law firm and there's a revolution, how can we make $1 million or 2 million or 10 million, right? So how do we push them over the edge far enough so that we can lasso them back and rescue them and they don't die without making it look like, we did it on purpose? I don't know.
You don't think
So
that's cynical?
yeah, it's cynical. And if I'm a lawyer, I want half your runway. I want half your runway. I don't want 100 grand. I want half your runway.
Right. Well, the Winklevosses should have thought of that, because the headlines around the world today are, from billionaires to indicted, and it would have been a lot simpler to spend a few dollars and run an S1 program. It seems like even if it never, or the SEC was going to take 2 or 3 years to try and make it effective, the fact that you filed it and got going is better than just saying, "Oh, we're just not going to file it." Go screw off, SEC. One way they're avoiding the law, saying it doesn't apply to you. The other way they're saying we're trying to comply with it, but this is new technology and the government can't stifle us. But we filed, and here's our info. Now it's in the SEC's court to do it. It seems like there needs to be a give and take there.
There is. The SEC has 20 days to respond with comments when you submit an S1, right? They will send you the comments within 20 days. You then have 20 days to respond and cure those comments. Then the SEC has 20 days to write new comments, and back and forth and back and forth. That's the way it works. Listen, we used to get securities registration statements through in less than 2 months when we did IPOs and secondaries, right? Less than 2 months.
And sorry.
No, go ahead.
Does filing an S1 prevent you from running your business?
No. All you're doing is you're registering a class of securities. That's what you're doing, right? You're registering it for public sale.
But I guess the community's debate is that they don't see the classification the same way that the SEC might. So that's,
I know that.
Right?
That's
the grand debate. Like, they don't see.
But you have a Supreme Court case that poses substantial problems on both sides. The SEC has to abide by what has been held as precedent, what an investment contract is. Whether the thing is made out of cryptography or paper is not material to them, to the SEC, right? I agree. I need a token to move freely through a system. If it unlocks functionality, acts as a payment mechanism, governance mechanism, I need it to move freely. I'm not filing Rule 144 every time a token's got to move. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody's going to do that, right?
Right.
The technology and the existing systems are incongruent.
If there is clarity on the SEC side as to the classification of a thing, which does involve accounting, by the way, right? If you sell tokens, that's not paid in capital as if you were selling securities. That's revenue, and it's prepaid revenue, which means you got an offsetting liability on your balance sheet, right? You owe them a network or an application or a thing because they gave you value, right? So there are a lot of complex issues at stake in the SEC's eyes, right? And I got to imagine they're not sitting around their table with these, dastardly laughs, plotting and scheming against the world. They're stuck behind well-settled law, and until there's new well-settled law, it's a problem. So that's the problem the SEC has, right? I can't imagine, especially Hester Pierce. She's really interested in this technology. Everybody's interested in this technology. How could you not be?
Right.
This really is a revolution in the programmability of value. It's a revolution in the storage and transfer of value. It might even be a revolution in monetary policy. So, and the wheels, the powers that be are very, very busy right now.
Well, hopefully it'll also be a revolution in the rules and regulations around, you know, folks who decide to build businesses in this space, because it does seem like that Kennedy law that you keep on bringing up may not necessarily be adequate for the way the technology is evolving. But we'll see. We'll
We'll
see.
see.
Well,
We'll
Yoli,
see.
I can't agree more with that. I just was participating in an event with another project, a project formed here in North America, or I should say in the United States, and they couldn't wait to leave. And they registered out in the British Virgin Islands, and there's like people physically moving there and switching to banks there and all that type of stuff. And it's not because they're at any point wealthy, they're just moving out and they want to be done with a lot of this silliness. So I can see that.
The problem is this. If a single person ends up with so much as a speck of dust in their wallet, a U.S. person, if a U.S. person ends up with a speck of dust of that token in their wallet, the SEC has jurisdiction over the token issuer.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with Ethereum and it's trading on an exchange, you withdraw it and send it to a U.S. person. There's nothing stopping that from happening until every single wallet address has a digital ID attached to it that blocks the flow of value to certain jurisdictions. And they're working on that too. The powers that be are thinking about this. Make no mistake, man.
Yeah, I read an article about that too, the digital crypto ID. It was somewhat conspiracy theorist, but still, it has some basis in the fact that somebody put out a blue ribbon committee to look into it.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
The excitement never ceases.
Yep.
In this space. And so, anything else you want to add there, Jason, before we close?
No, but maybe next podcast or AMA.
Well, yeah, that's one exciting thing we're going to have. So guys, look out. We will be having a community AMA soon. We're curious what you think of what's been happening in the space. So definitely comment if you're watching us on YouTube. With that being said, thank you for joining us this week. And thank you, guys. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Yoli.
Thank you, Yoli.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Jason.
See you soon, everybody.
Bye.